For over a year now, I had two dreams that felt impossible for me to achieve. The first, winning a 50-50.
Hi there, I'm Tainari.
The second, clearing the Spiral Abyss with my favorite character as the main on-field damage dealer in what's commonly described as a hyper-carry team comp. But when I saw the Abyss lineup for the second half of 5.8, I instantly knew that my chance to make one of those dreams come true had finally come. Unfortunately, I was at Gamescom when I had this realization, and as luck would have it, I got sick right after coming back from my trip, which knocked me out for almost 2 weeks. By the time I was back on my feet, work had piled up for me, deadlines were waiting, and then also this little thing called Not Cry came out, and as a result, I just completely forgot about the Abyss. That was until I opened for 12 again, 2 days before reset. With less than 48 hours left and only 2 evenings free after work, I knew that if I was going to attempt this, it was going to cost me some sleep. And even then, it was probably already too late. But since there was no telling when or if I'd ever get another opportunity like this, I decided to still give it a shot. Little did I know that this would turn into an Abyss run that I won't forget anytime soon. Alright, but first we need to talk about why playing Beidou as a hyper carry has been so difficult and what exactly has changed now. Well, besides the rising enemy HP values in the Abyss, the fact that Beidou is just a 4-star and also not meant to be played as an on-field carry. Why am I doing this again? Anyway, it essentially all comes down to how Beidou's burst is designed. Once it's used, the active character's normal and charge attacks that hit an enemy will create a lightning discharge that deals electro damage and can jump between opponents. And that jumping between opponents is where both her strength, but also her weakness lies. You see, together with her C2, each lightning discharge can jump up to 4 times. Or 5 if you count the initial hit. This allows her to dish out truly massive amounts of damage for just being a 4-star. However, this only works if there are 2 or more targets. As soon as there's only one enemy, like for example when you are fighting a boss, the lightning no longer can jump, meaning it only deals damage with the initial hit. Now I know math can be scary, but I'm quite confident that we all understand that 5 is a lot more than 1. Or in other words, if there are 2 or more enemies, Beidou's damage output is almost 5-star worthy, but as soon as there's only 1, she only feels about as threatening as a Chi-Chi with a pool noodle. Although, now that I think of it, that does sound kind of intimidating. Now, if you've set foot in any of the Abysses over the past year, you know that Hoyo really likes to put single target boss encounters on every chamber of floor 12. And with that, making my dream of clearing with a hyper carry Beidou essentially impossible. However, this is precisely what changed with the second Abyss lineup of 5.8. 2 of the chambers are entirely AoE, with only the last one being single target. Sure, I knew that cactus would likely be a huge problem, foreshadowing, but this still was the best chance I got in months. So, with less than 48 hours left, I got to work. Okay, first of all, I needed a suitable team that would support my Beidou as much as possible. Because, as I just mentioned, there are a lot of things working against me. Luckily, this didn't take me much time, since I already came up with a rough draft for the team on the evening I saw the Abyss lineup. So, here are the 3 characters I've chosen. First up, we have Farina. Now I know, it's always a Farina wheelchair comp to carry the weird off-meta pick. And listen, I get it, I would also normally prefer to play something else for variety's sake. But in this case, I want to push my Beidou's damage output to its fullest potential. And that means there's just no way around the weird theater kid with 500 years of trauma. Now I also won't lie and be the first to admit that Farina will contribute a decent amount of her personal damage. That means Beidou won't be the only one, which in theory goes against the idea of a hyper carry team. But since Farina is also commonly used in those types of teams, I think that's a fair exception to make. For her build, I'm using a pretty standard setup with 4-piece golden troop and a Fev sword. I very much prefer the Fev sword here over Festering Desire or the Pipe, because with Beidou's burst being the only real other source of damage, and its ER cost being fairly high, I need every bit of extra particle generation on a team I can get. Then, as we all know, every arena team needs a decent therapist. But since that is too expensive, we have to settle for the next best thing: music. So there was simply no better choice for the slot than Shilonen. Not only has she more than adequate healing to counter the HP drain, she also provides strong and reliable resistant shredding, as well as a sizable damage bonus through the Skull of Cinder City's artifact set. For a weapon, I chose a Fav sword again, because in my mind there never exists such a thing as too much Fav weapons.
Pick it up. Pick it up.
This leaves only the last slot. Together with Arena and Shilonen, I already had plenty of increases in damage bonus and resistant shredding. So the last thing I was looking for was a character that could buff Beidou's attack stat. And so I spent hours desperately searching for the ideal character that could fit that specific— who am I kidding, it's Bennett. I have thought about Kutosawa for some time, since Beidou is an electro character and therefore able to make use of Sarah's C6, which gives an additional 60% crit damage, but I ultimately decided against that idea, since she also has quite high ER requirements, which aren't that easy to manage, and I already had more than enough to worry about with Beidou's energy. Also, she's a bit more clunky to use, and given my limited time, I thought I could do nothing wrong with choosing Bennett. Alright, let's now talk about Beidou. With Arena on the team, you probably expect me to use the Marecia Hunter set, and understandably so. While the 2-piece isn't that impactful, since most of Beidou's damage comes from a burst, the 4-piece bonus is extremely powerful. Getting 36% additional crit rate, especially on a 4-star character, which typically struggles to get enough crit stats, it's an obvious choice. But I decided against it. Listen, I'm a Beidou main. I have spent well over 100,000 resin in that godforsaken emblem domain, and as a result, I have gotten some really good pieces. This means that when I compare her to my Marecia Hunter set, which to be fair isn't that great, the additional crit rolls on the emblem set almost make up for the 36% from the set bonus. I mean, not quite, but you get what I'm saying. And on top of that also comes set boni from the emblem set, which are both quite impactful even for an on-field playstyle. So to me, emblem made just more sense here to use. When it came to a weapon, there honestly wasn't much consideration to be made. Serpent Spine, in my mind, was the clear choice. It is simply one of the best 4-star claimers in the game, and even outranks many of the 5-star weapons across multiple characters, thanks to its 50% damage increase and additional crit substats. For Beidou's intended playstyle as a sub DPS, you can essentially consider it to be a signature weapon. And all that resulted in this final build. With the team being assembled, it was now time to challenge the Abyss and see if I could finally make my dream come true. But before that, we need to talk about what my goals are here exactly. Just clearing the Abyss and getting 36 stars would be too easy, and something I could have already done before by just using an overpowered team on the second half to compensate for the slower time my Beidou team would have had. And that just doesn't feel right to me. For me to consider this a success, I want my Beidou to clear each chamber in less than 90 seconds, since that is half the time you have to get 3 stars. It's not a perfect metric, since not all chambers are created equal, but I think it's the best we can do to figure out whether or not the team can hold their own or not. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dive into the first chamber. This chamber sent 4 waves of Aramites at me, each consisting of 2 small guys and 1 big one. To me, that sounded like ideal AoE conditions for my Beidou. However, I quickly realized the problem. Since there's a big difference in the amount of HP from the big to the smaller Aramites, and the next small ones only spawn after the big one has been defeated, it can quite easily happen that there's only the big Aramites left in a wave. And that means I am stuck in a single target situation, and as we have established earlier, that's bad news. But after a bit of trial and error, I figured out that in order to work around that, I just needed to be really careful to focus most of my damage on the big guys to keep the fight AoE for as long as possible. And that actually seemed to help quite a bit, resulting in me shaving off already 20 seconds of my time. However, it was still not enough to actually clear the chamber in less than 90 seconds. And after a couple of failed retries, I had to come to the conclusion, even though I didn't want to admit it, that my Genius team had some issues. There were mainly 2 problems. The first was Bennett. or rather the fact that he is Pyro. Even though Beidou isn't the best at applying Electro, there will be overload reactions being triggered, especially with the Pyro infusion from Bennett's C6. While that would normally not be a problem, the reaction has the unfortunate side effect of knocking enemies around, which can in this case very quickly result in them being knocked out of range from Beidou's burst. The second one was energy. Even in a scenario of so many enemies, I was struggling at times to consistently burst on cooldown with Beidou, which means I'm either losing important buffs if I have to delay the burst, or I will completely mess up the rotation altogether. While I thought I could get through the first chamber with some more retries by just waiting for a lucky run, after I checked out the second chamber, I was sure that I needed to make some adjustments if I wanted to clear the Abyss before the impending reset. But what change could I possibly make here? After I spent some time thinking, I came to the conclusion that Bennett needed to go. Sorry my guy, the Pyro infusion was just too annoying to deal with, and he also wasn't much help in terms of energy management. But who am I using instead here? Bennett is simply the go-to attack buffer in the game. I kept searching and searching through my roster to find a character that would simultaneously solve my energy problem, as well as being able to provide something close to the power of Bennett. Now that is certainly no easy task, and just when I was close to giving up, I realized that there was one character that could achieve exactly that. Ian-san is essentially Bennett's cooler older sister. While the attack buff from her burst isn't quite as strong as the one from Bennett, she also gives 30% additional attack from her C2 and 25% damage increase from her C6. On top of that, she's an electro unit, which will unlock the electro resonance for the team to solve my current energy issues. So why haven't I considered her before? Well, as you probably know, Ian-san only keeps her full buffing capabilities if the active character moves a lot, which isn't the case for Beidou. However, it seems like my two remaining brain cells decided to cooperate for once and reminded me of one very important fact. Beidou's burst can snapshot, meaning if I use Beidou's burst right after Ian-san, I will still have the full benefits of the buffs active even when Ian-san's Night Soul points will get depleted over time. It is essentially the same scam I pulled in gym class back then when I convinced my coach I already did 4 laps, when in reality I only did 2. Now, unfortunately it was getting late at this point, and so I had to call it a day before being able to test the team. But I was confident that with Ian-san on the team now, I would be able to achieve my goal on the next day. On day 2, with only a few hours remaining before reset, it was now time for my final attempts at clearing the Abyss with my hyper carry Beidou. But before I was ready to jump in, there was one more thing bothering me. Beidou's weapon. The Serpent Spine just didn't feel great the day before. In heavy AoE situations like Chamber 1, it's basically impossible to avoid getting hit unless you're running a shield or spending half your rotation dodging instead of attacking. That's at least the excuse I came up with in my head, do not accept that it might be a skill issue. Anyway, it meant the weapon's buff uptime was just terrible for me, making it far weaker than it should be. So, with the Sumeru Chronicled Wishbanner still being active, I decided to make a little investment. I wanted Dia's signature weapon anyway, because honestly, I think she deserves at least one nice thing after getting shafted by Hoyo. But Beacon is also one of the better 5-star stat sticks for Beidou, with its higher base attack, crit rate substat, and fairly reliable attack percent buff from its passive. When going in for my first attempt of the day, I could instantly notice a difference from the adjustments I've made. The team felt great, rotations were smooth, and my Beidou was finally able to shine. And all that resulted in me clearing the chamber easily in less than 90 seconds on that very first attempt. Honestly, I was kind of shocked. After all the struggling on day 1, this felt surprisingly smooth, which gave me a lot of hope for the remaining chambers. Now in hindsight, I will say that the team with Bennett would absolutely have been able to clear this Abyss as well. Sure, the overload reactions would still have been a bit annoying, but my main issue was energy, and as I just now realized, that was entirely self-inflicted, since my stupid ass used the wrong build for my Beidou. I was using the build that I entered to rank higher on the Akasha leaderboards, which had way less energy recharge than what I should have. So remember to always check your builds before entering the Abyss. Now, Chamber 2 consists of multiple waves of automatons. On paper, that didn't sound too bad. A decent amount of enemies, that should be great for Beidou's burst, right? Yeah, no, it sucked. While the enemies themselves were simple, they aren't doing much, the automatons on the outside had one mechanic that seemed specifically designed to annoy me: jumping away. And of course, they didn't just jump a few meters, no, they jumped so far they basically landed on another abyss floor. Meaning I was forced to run after them around the arena. And that single issue alone cost me way too much time, and I knew I needed to find a solution fast. So I did some research, and according to the wiki, they only use that move when you get too close to them. From my experience, I would say that's true. But they also do it whenever they feel like it. Now, for some time I thought I found a solution by standing in a perfect line with the enemies, which seemingly blocked the path for the automatons in front of me to jump back, but in reality that turned out to be extremely inconsistent. So in the end, I did what every good Beidou main does in a situation like this: bash my head against the wall until the wall gives in. So I was just waiting for a lucky run. But of course, fixing that alone wasn't enough, because even when they all stayed where I wanted them, I was still lacking DPS. So it was time to use the secret Beidou technique. Yes, it's absolutely not a secret and I just made the name up. But anyway, you see, normally Beidou is terrible at using her own burst to its fullest potential. If you run her usual normal attack combo and 5 of a dash cancel, you only get around 8 to 9 lightning bolts, which is way below what the burst could be doing. However, because the automatons in this chamber attack so rarely, I could safely swap to N1 walk cancels instead. With perfect execution, this increases the total lightning bolts to 12, which is a massive difference and drastically improves her DPS. And would you know it, that change seemed to be enough to finally push my clear time below 90 seconds. Now, it wasn't quite as fast as Chamber 1, but considering how annoying those automatons were, I'll gladly take it. And then there was only one thing left between me and my goal: the cactus. A single target boss encounter. Going in, I was already bracing myself for disappointment. If anything was going to end this run, it would be this. But after coming this far, there was no way I'd just give up without at least giving it a real try. Now, while Beidou is heavily disadvantaged in single target scenarios, that doesn't automatically mean it's impossible. My main source of hope here was that this fight is mechanics based rather than just being a huge HP sponge. And that key mechanic being hitting the head during the intermission with electrocharge attacks. And as some of you might have already realized, when I was designing the team, this is exactly the fight I was preparing for. But it obviously wasn't going to be easy. After a few attempts, I realized I was still quite far from killing the boss, so I had to take a step back and rethink my approach. While I could handle the intermission mechanic fairly well, it unfortunately still came down to a DPS check. If I couldn't finish the cactus before it entered the second intermission, there would be no chance for me to end the fight before the timer would go past 90 seconds. And there was still a chunky amount of HP left. There's no sugarcoating it, Beidou's single target weakness was on full display here. But I also wasn't done yet. I still had a few tricks up my sleeve. First of all, I saw that there were a few points where I could adjust my rotation to the phases of the fight, potentially allowing me to squeeze out a bit more DPS. You see, after the intermission the boss will enter a weakened state, with its resistances being massively reduced. And so by preparing all my buffs right before he would enter the state, I could make sure to get the most out of it. Also, I realized this was one of the rare fights where I could make real use of one of my favorite parts in Beidou's kit: her elemental skill. In case you don't know, when timed perfectly with an incoming attack, his skill completely negates the hit and boosts its own damage significantly. Since the cactus is constantly spamming attacks outside of its intermission, I had plenty of chances to pull off a perfect counter and squeeze out a decent bit of extra damage. So I thought with a few good timed skills, I might be able to make this possible. And so with those changes in mind, I went back in. And the result? Well, see for yourself. So I actually did it. I achieved my goal of clearing the Abyss with a hyper carry Beidou team. Honestly, while this was extremely stressful for me, I had a lot of fun with it. I would have loved to showcase more different teams, but given my stupid time constraints, I just had to focus on the classic Farina hyper carry comp. But if you are interested, I will absolutely revisit those other teams in later videos. There's even a 4-star only variant that I think can be quite competitive. But for now, that has been all from me. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!